Hello, everyone. I'm Marty Parker, the President and Chief Executive Officer of Waterstone Human Capital. I'm delighted to be with you here today from the self-quarantine of my home, as many of you are, I'm sure, are either dealing with in times of quarantine or based on working from home under the current circumstances of today. Thank you for joining us for our webinar. We've got 45 minutes scheduled today. We'll use it if we need it. And on that note, we will get started on our webinar. This all began last week when I was actually returning from my vacation in Florida on car, when I was dealing with a number of different issues and calls and questions on how to address and deal with organizational culture during these incredibly uncertain times. So we felt that this may be of good value to those of you who are joining us today. And for those of you who couldn't join us today, or those of you who have sent notes, we will in fact do another one of these, at least one next week. So John F. Kennedy, as some of you may have seen, as this is becoming a quote that was being used quite often, but in 1959, at an address in the United States, he used the definition of the Chinese brushstrokes for the word crisis as a great example of what we're dealing with today. And in fact, one brushstroke, as Kennedy talked about, stands for danger, and the other one, opportunity. So in a crisis, beware of danger, but recognize the opportunity. Now, although this is apparently not exactly true in terms of the translation, I think the message resonates with us all today, and perhaps more danger than opportunity. We are certainly at war, as we've heard many of our healthcare leaders and political leaders and business leaders for sure. We are united globally, I think, in this war, although handling it all in the best way we know how and differently. But it is not a time to forget who we are, or in other words, how we behave, our cultures. This is not a time to panic as it relates to the behaviors of our organization and what makes us who we are. And in fact, it is a time of great opportunity. It's been said that corporate culture is defined when no one's watching. Well, I can assure you today, the people in your organization are watching, and they will be watching as this crisis unfolds. We really have compiled some information today based on a number of different things. Our lessons learned in 2008 and 9, our 17 years of business operations in leadership advisory services, whether it be an executive search or culture and engagement measurement, or a leadership training side, which is more recent. And I want to share a number of those experiences with you and share and enlighten you some of the things that we've learned. And much of what we've learned really came from that 2008 and 2009 Great Recession. Of course, what we're dealing with now is unprecedented. We have borders closing, sometimes interprovincial, certainly in our country of Canada, closing. We see a stock market down as much as 25 to 30%. We are all dealing with decisions that we've frankly maybe never, certainly the speed of which, had to address before, as our team members are forced to work at home and are dealing with uncertainty and fear. But as leaders, and it's critical to say, often in times of great crisis, certainly we're uncertain and we're fearful as well. And that can lead to either a lack of decision or being frozen, or making decisions without enough information and in fact panicky. And at Waterstone, our purpose is building high performance cultures. And that has no bias towards in good times or in bad. And so what we want to do today is share with you, based on our lessons learned, based on our experience, a 5-step playbook that you can use to build and enhance your culture in these times of crisis, and any times of crisis, in fact. because culture is your competitive advantage. And you can copy strategy and ideas. You can take people, maybe learn from other organizations, but you can't duplicate the behavior of another organization, the collective behavior that is. And so this is what defines us. And this is in many ways what will get us through this crisis. Waterstone has an offer for all of you on the phone today that you can take advantage of if you wish. And following this, you can reach out to me and I'll put you in touch with the right people to execute on this. You can each either do a culture and crisis engage survey. This is an abbreviated survey which gets a sense of your own culture, benchmarks where you are today, but we will also offer you 4 weeks of 3-question pulses from our engage surveys to connect with your and ask your team members, in fact, some key questions around your culture. And of course, we have some recommendations on what those could be, but those certainly can be customized. Or you can take advantage of a 1-hour Building High Performance Teams webinar for your leadership in your organization. So we'll have some communication information at the end of this webinar that you can action. Our 5-step playbook is really based on the following 5 attributes. First of all, leaning into your culture. We'll talk about all of these in a moment. Being fast and focused in your execution in your business and in keeping your culture at the center of that. Communication as leaders, and virtually all of us on this call are CEOs, heads of HR, leaders in other disciplines. And so how we communicate and how we behave here certainly defines us in our culture. Practicing self-care, you might not hear that a lot, but I think in wartime, this is more important than in peacetime. And we'll talk about how we can do that, and in fact, not just with our physical health, but with our mental health as well. And being positive and optimistic through these times, which are extremely difficult to do, we recognize, but it is a requirement of leadership. This does not mean being Pollyannish. It does not mean being unrealistic, but being positive is important when migrating through a crisis, and it's important to your culture. So we talked about culture as competitive advantage, but it's hard to be that competitive advantage if you don't know your culture, if you can't easily articulate it and define it. And this is an opportunity for you and your colleagues as leaders to take a step back and ask yourselves the question, what defines your organization? What are the behaviors in good times and in bad that make you unique and special? This is a time that you need to lean into those behaviors to ensure that you don't lose them during a very difficult time or confuse people with what we call split personality leadership, saying one thing and doing another, in other words. So how can you live your culture and be true to that culture in these unusual and tough times? Well, you can't if you don't know it, and you can't measure that culture. So stay on top of it. Check in with your teams on one-on-ones, in huddles. Our organization is doing daily huddles now. We have not been a daily huddle organization as an organization at large, and we are today. This is a time for both qualitative and quantitative markers to find out how people are feeling. We don't know from one day to the next, from 1 hour to the next, what is going to occur. And so checking in possibly on a weekly basis in very brief check-ins, both in person as leaders, which is more important than anything, but as our organizations are obviously decentralized today and distributed, and we can't reach everybody, find out how they're feeling, and you can identify some issues. And what's absolutely critical is that you align your leaders and ensure your leaders are aligned, equipped, and trained to lead in these times. And we can talk more about that. There's some questions that have been sent in aligned to that as well. And walking the talk, this is behaving in a way that that a wartime leader, a wartime general would. And we'll talk specifically as to what that looks like. And let me give you a great example, I think, of leaning into your culture. And this references us back to the times in 2008 and 2009. And I'll use Four Seasons as a great example. And I wrote about this in my book, Culture Connection. In 2009, obviously, like this moment now, the hospitality industry had been decimated. And Four Seasons was certainly at an impasse as to what they were going to do. They needed to make workforce reductions, both in terms of their managed services field operations, but also in their corporate head office. And they did so swiftly. But Katie Taylor, who had taken over for the founder, who was still the chair, Isidore Sharp, I think did some phenomenal things. She looked to the very well-defined Four Seasons culture and guiding principles. And one was the golden rule, treating people the way you want to be treated. And even through those downsizings, Katie and her team kept what they called a displacement database. And what they did with that displacement database is that when the market came back in early 2010 in their business, or started to return, they started to hire back those people that they felt would add value to their business. And they were quite explicit about that, to the tune of over 20% of their displaced individuals came back. Now, I'm certain and know from days past speaking with Katie and Isidore Sharp that they stayed in regular contact to the degree they could in order to make that happen. But an excellent example. Now, in 2010, they also really saw something significant happen. See, one of the other core values of Four Seasons is exceptional and excellent service and quality. They've innovated substantially in the category of hospitality for years, and they stayed true to that, not cutting their high levels of service, not cutting their innovative anticipatory service and or the quality of their premium hotels and resorts of the time. And that got rewarded to the extent that the RevPAR, which is a common indicator, a key indicator in the hospitality and lodging business, the revenue per guest per accommodation, was 2 times the industry average by the middle of 2010. So know your culture, stay on top of your culture, communicate effectively, but also lean in and ensure that what you're doing that works for you, that sets you apart, you continue to do, and you do not compromise. You will be rewarded. These are easy times to move away, and we all feel to a certain extent with the decisions we've been making that we are. But that should not happen, and we advise you to follow the great example of Four Seasons. Next is fast and focus. Now, you might say to yourself, what does that have to do with culture? Well, let's talk about that. First of all, as per the Four Seasons example, this is the time to get clarity, not just on your culture, but on your purpose. In fact, if you even have one. And what is that purpose? For us, it's building high performance cultures at Waterstone. And whether we're not going to be probably as busy as we'd like to be in the coming weeks, possibly months, in our executive search practice, but that doesn't take away from being there for our existing clients in that practice, but certainly as it relates to our purpose of helping build organizations through programs like this, by being present for our customers. We know what our purpose is, and we will buy into that and deliver upon that as hard as this may be. People buy into a larger purpose, and Simon Sinek has written about this, and we all know this, but this is the time to get quick clarity on it and start to use it. Know your desired outcomes and intervals during and post-crisis. I would highly recommend you to use what other leaders have done before and have great clarity on what success is going to look like as you come through this and as we come out of this, because we will come out of this. When, we don't know. So what are your 30, 60, and 90-day plans? Much of our planning today has to do with preserving cash and making difficult decisions and being market ready and close to our customers. But what do you want to be like? What do you want to look like when you come out of this? And what are you going to preserve and grow out of your culture, of how you do things? And that will migrate and take you forward. Think about what Brian Scudamore has done for years at O2E Brands. More commonly, you might know Brian as the CEO of Got Junk. He's always had a painted picture as to what the business would look like, and has taken that down to an individual level. So what's your painted picture through this crisis? In our case, it's to be better, faster, and more nimble and closer to our customers as we come out. We don't know today when we'll come out. We don't know what other services that we will be providing, but I know by staying close to our customers, I know by listening to our team members, and I know by being true to our own culture of being very client focused, number one, and being highly performance based, number two, that will serve us well. So think about how your culture can help you reach that goal, and get alignment fast and furious with your leaders. Everyone needs to be in the same page and rowing in the same direction. When we're in good times, this is important. When we're in challenging times, this is even more important. And as leaders, we must lead from the front. We must take the initiative first, and we must be prepared to do things that we would ask of anybody else. Obviously, these are platitudes we read about. This is the time, this is our time as leaders to really prove ourselves and represent our culture the way it needs to be led. When you think of a great example of kind of being fast and furious and clear in terms of what those objectives were, I look back to, again, the lessons of the Great Recession of 08 and 09. Clive Bedeau was the CEO of WestJet, who had just come through unprecedented 10, 11 years of growth at the time. And, they had extremely low demand, as we're seeing now. Of course, they would have experienced that in 9/11 as well, but even more so today. They had a culture and have a culture of ownership. We've heard the internal and external branding of WestJet being owners care. And they built an initiative based on their ownership mentality and, of course, immense cost-cutting initiatives to have all eyes on cost. And it was a in-flight personnel who recommended the simple recommendation. Now, if you think back to those times, we weren't walking around with our water bottles and refilling them to the extent we were today. In fact, many of them weren't existing. So by saving and reusing just water bottles for staff in those days, WestJet saved $90,000. And this just grew from the all eyes on cost. So by being fast, furious, by aligning to their own purpose, to their own values, this made a significant difference in their business. And it was seemingly easy to do because that was exactly who they were. There's probably nothing more important in terms of culture and in times of crisis than how we communicate. And as leaders, and we teach this in our Building High Performance Teams program, the challenge today is greater than ever to communicate. There are more communication vehicles, there are more opportunities for us to communicate, and frankly, it's harder. But now more than ever, we need to be visible as leaders, and virtually for now, in most cases, for those of us working at home. We need to reach out as often as possible, and not just to our own team members, but to our customers and clients, to our suppliers, and I might even offer to your competition. This is an opportunity that where you can learn what your competition is doing. They might even engage in a larger discussion with you. And certainly we saw a lot of in 2009, competitive environments came together to share, but that actually, as we came out of that Great Recession, we saw the more formal integration merger of many of our clients. And I'm certain if you take advantage of this opportunity, it will be good for you. You'll learn things and encourage your team members and your other leaders in your business to do the same. This is not a time, frankly, to be frozen when it comes to communication. Use your strengths as leaders, your empathy, your authenticity, and be vulnerable in terms of the fears that you're sharing as well. We are not necessarily there to be anything but real, but being there in itself is important. And be transparent. In what we teach is in our high performance teams and cultures is to create a psychologically and safe environment. A crisis is an incredible time to deliver tough messages with empathy, with compassion and care. It's an incredible time as leaders and a very taxing time, I recognize, to listen to many of the challenges that we're listening to today. I've certainly had my share, including one this morning, where client's father-in-law is been hospitalized with COVID-19. And obviously there's great care and concern for him. Make sure to listen and process check what you've heard, because all challenges and issues are not created equal. And on a positive note, as I mentioned before, this is our moment as leaders. Take it. It's a massive responsibility and burden, but it will never be forgotten, and you will make a difference in your organizations. And on a fun note, I heard this the other day, and I think it's fantastic. Take this as an opportunity to more closely connect with your team members or customers than you ever have. The concept of Zoom is kind of taking over the world, or webinars, or or Google Chats, or whatever that you can do. Possibly, send a customer a Starbucks card and offer to have a Zoom coffee with them in the morning, or a team member. Do the same by sending them their favorite meal via Uber Eats and have a Zoom lunch. Or even what we hope to do next week in our organization is stage, if you haven't done it already, your first Zoom cocktail with even a favorite libation at the end of the day over a Zoom or a video conference. I wonder if Zooming is going to become the new term like Kleenex here through these times. So communication is absolutely vital. I just wanted to quickly show you our 5 attributes of high performance teams and cultures. And effectively, you could change that out with the term leaders, where clarity of vision and leadership communication is a critical imperative of training leaders to lead in a contemporary time, creating an environment of psychological safety, and that is best done by being transparent, by being vulnerable, and we're seeing more of that and closer connections than we've ever seen. In fact, I don't like the term social distance. I think it's physical difference and or spatial difference, because I think this is a time where we need to and are becoming more socially connected than we ever have before. But those two, above all, are critical to our success as leaders in supporting our culture. Now, you may be surprised by seeing this as in the playbook for building your own culture in times of crisis, but we need to truly take care of ourselves before we can take responsibility for taking care of our cultures or others. And leading through a crisis takes just a significant amount of energy, both emotional, I would say all of emotional, mental, and physical. It requires great prioritization in terms of how we do that, because more is being asked of us. And I remember back in 2008, where I had a 5-year-old business, and one of our board members, after a board meeting, pulled me aside and said, I'll never forget it, said, Marty, you look like shit. And I said, excuse me. He said, are you sleeping? Are you exercising? What are you doing to take care of yourself? This is not the time to let that slip. And I would offer that there are great resources out there, but be mindful of your personal fitness, stay active, eat as healthy as you can, get as plenty of rest. And this, if it's not a time that you're using tools to help you be more mindful, whether it's just reflection at a time of day, meditation, which I personally use and subscribe to. And when you're dealing with your own self-care, remember the principles we use as leaders: people first, problems second. And there's some great examples just now, not even going back to the last recession that I can think about. I was speaking to one of our Canada's most admired CEOs, Sean O'Brien, the CEO of Reliance Home Comfort. And as I'm chatting with him the other day, I can hear him kind of panting. And I said, Sean, if you don't mind me asking, what are you doing? He said, well, I'm taking this time while I'm on, while I'm working at home to walk 10K a day, but I'm typically on the phone constantly through that. And I thought, wow. Now I haven't walked 10K since I talked to Sean 3 days ago, but I've certainly had a walk each day, and that's because of you, Sean. So great example. Yesterday, I was speaking to the Chief Executive Officer of a company called, a great organization called Canadian Orthodontic Partners, pardon me, Anthony Malonis. And Anthony was just finishing up with me to do a Zoom call with his team who are in or with his family who are all over the country at school and on their own, and then going out for a run. And these are great examples, but they're also great tools that you can use. I work with a gentleman by the name of Dr. Greg Wells. And if you have never read The Ripple Effect, this is a time to get this book, which is really all about sleeping, eating, moving, and thinking better. And it's great for leaders. And his most recent book was his Rest, Refocus, Recharge. Make sure you do not burn the candle at both ends at this time. You are the example. And you, quite frankly, are critical and are mission critical to your future and your future business. And the last thing I'm going to leave you with today is transparent, is being positive. Now, as I said before, having a great attitude is critical at this time, but it's not always possible. It's been hard for me this week. We've made changes in our organization across the board, and it's been hard, and it is hard. But I'm not, again, suggesting that we be Pollyannish about what we're dealing with. We don't know some of the challenges ahead, but we need to have a good attitude. You know, my favorite quote is, the last of the human freedoms is to choose one's attitude in any given set of circumstances. And if you had never read the book, Man's Search for Meaning by Viktor Frankl, I won't go into it further, but I would strongly suggest that 75-page read. It certainly made a big difference in my life. But remind ourselves how lucky we are and how fortunate we are to be in the situation. We will get through this. We will, many of us, be better for it. And it's okay to have to pick your own self up by the bootstraps and lift your legs up one by the other out of your bed every morning. But equip yourself to have a good attitude through it. And to do that, being transparent is the best way. Being with challenges, with opportunities, by communicating, how are we going to grow? How are we going to pivot? How are we going to evolve? I'm so proud of team members at Waterstone. Another one today who sent me a note as to what she is going to be doing. And certainly I hadn't asked the question over the weekend to help us be better. Incredible. Optimism is infectious, and we're all in this together. And by the way, it's okay to have some fun. It's okay to have your cocktails via Zoom and to have a laugh here and there. And I'm incredibly touched by how many people are sending out, you know, memes and funny quotes and videos, et cetera, as I'm sure you're all experiencing. And I think we need all of this in these difficult times, and your organization needs it too. And last but not least, by all means, find ways to celebrate during these difficult times. That is you know, truly something that will set you apart, and people will remember you through these times for celebrating the little wins, medium wins, big wins. And although I have wins here, it could be the attempts, it could be the actions. As we recognize our kids for failure sometimes, for just giving it their best shot, this is the time for us to do that. And I want to give you some good news, I think, and lots of repurposing that we see out there right now from a positive standpoint. Distillers, I'm involved in a distillery business as an investor that are, you know, turning operations or part of them into creating hand sanitizers, some at no cost. You know, limo drivers and Uber drivers who are volunteering to help out in emergency care, or repurposing themselves to as they're not going to and from airports, to deliver food. You know, hotels in New York and London and New Orleans and across our country, I'm sure in Toronto as well, who are offering free rooms to help the homeless or people who are in healthcare need. You know, I recently read about the Delta CEO Ed Bastian, who has foregone 6 months of his own salary as they've had to go through significant layoffs. And those are the kinds of really good news and great stories that we hear out there. Athletes and stars who are donating money. Drew Brees most recently giving $5 million to the city of New Orleans, where he plays for the Saints, for the relief efforts. I mean, this is just, there's great news. And in fact, if you just need a pick me up, go to goodnewsnetwork.org, something I've recently found, and we might need that on occasion, which is a news vertical site that only reports good news. So be positive and be optimistic through these times. Now, I want to tackle some questions here that have been sent to us, a few in advance. I have a chat thing here, a box here that I can also take on any who want to send those in the remaining time that we have. One that I have from a few of you was as follows. It says, what are the most common mistakes a leader can make in a crisis that will kill culture? Well, I wrote about this in Culture Connection, but I think that there's probably a few more that we've learned of since. First of all, what I would call lack of alignment with leadership team in general, saying one thing, doing another, or saying different things, what we call split personality leadership. I also think that it's forgetting and turning the behaviors of an organization possibly in rallying under the banner of survival. That's going to really have an impact on people. Not unlike the examples I shared, a few more, and there are many others. Make sure you align to who you really are. That's going to be easiest anyway, and that will keep you aligned and not have a negative impact on culture. The other one that I have here that has been shared with me, and thank you for those of you who did, was, what if there's no good news to share? Do I continue to communicate it or communicate at all? Well, in this case, I would say no news is not good news. Now more than ever, we know this in times of personal crisis, we need to be more connected. And as leaders, we need to communicate more often. If you are communicating weekly, as leaders, communicate daily. If you're communicating to your clients on a weekly or bi-weekly basis, maybe it needs to be at a faster pace. But no news is not good news. And it's okay to say, hey, things aren't going well, but I want to report on where we are right now. This is a time for great connection. This is a time for great alignment to who you are. I have an opportunity to look at a couple more here that have been sent through, and if you have them, you can add them into the chat box in the time. We have about 10 or so minutes remaining. And that is, let me look at this one. Is it the right time to take a hard line on culture behaviors in terms of changing them, or if people are moving away from them? How long do we wait? The answer I would share with you here is you don't. I mean, I've written about one of the worst things we can see is high performers acting in a way that is in alignment with our culture, because high performers get recognized, they get rewarded, and people will follow them. I think in times of crisis, you really need to take a hard line on this. It likely means one-on-one communication, but probably once. And if it's something that's starting to ripple through the organization, it needs to be addressed quickly. And so what I would suggest here is that's dealt with swiftly, it's dealt with honestly, and at times, just to be sensitive to it, people don't know. Often they don't know. Often they think what they're doing is because it's what you may want. They may have misinterpreted. So I would seek to understand before being understood in all cases there. Take a look at another one here. How transparent are we talking? Do I share the good and the bad? Well, I think we've talked about that. Yeah, and I think people want to be communicated to, and they want transparency and honestly. Obviously, you have to determine how bad, if it's that bad. But you know, we're adults. We have good judgment, and people can handle it. And I think if your response to that is talking about how you're going to deal with it, it's positive. Is this likely to change our culture? What do we do if these changes aren't what we want or need? Wow, good question. I think culture doesn't change quickly. I liken it in these parts to moving an aircraft carrier in the Welland Canal. Depending on what part you are in our country or in the United States, our canal isn't that wide here. Let's put it that way. Culture changes slowly, and it's about nudging things to move. So cultures evolve. and they take time. And I think crises allow us to further represent our existing culture and determine what needs to change. It's mostly operating, our operating businesses that can have impacts. And when we have changes and cuts and furloughs and layovers and expense reductions, those can have an impact. But most people understand that these are unique times. It can have a positive change. It can bring a closer connectivity. It can lead you into other lines of business. It can create opportunity, because when we're communicating, if we're good at it, we're listening, not just talking. We're hearing. We're understanding where people are. And so I would say cultures will evolve, but they won't change quickly. And I wouldn't worry as much about, is my culture going to get away from me? But be mindful of the behaviors, which is one of the other reasons that keeping an eye on even the smallest of measurements of where things are at. Take possibly another question here. How do we communicate? When do you say leadership? When I say leadership communications, when you say it, I'm sorry, is that all leaders as the CEO only? Is their roles different now than in the time of crisis? It's all leaders. It is all leaders. And is it different now than in a time of crisis? You bet. I think times of crisis make us better communicators. It really defines our cultures. It enables us to do some things more frequently that we probably should do in better times. But I would say all leaders need to be on the same page, and we need to find our own rhythms on how we communicate best. Not everyone does it best in person. Some people do it better in the written word. Some people would do it better one-on-one. But we do need, as obviously a key theme here, to be connected. And so on that, I'll wrap up here. And I want to thank all of you who've joined our culture leading and building culture in crisis webinar today. We will have some contact information here, and I'll also share with you my own contact information and remind you that our offer for you today is to provide you with our culture in crisis engage survey in 4 weeks of 3 pulse questions, and that can be in your organization at large. It could be in a subset of your organization if you deem that more appropriate, or in fact, we'll provide a 1-hour building high performance teams webinar for your leadership teams. This is not a difficult thing to engage in right now. In fact, it's something we're delighted to be there with you and helping you through this. We will get better through this. We will prevail. We don't know when, we don't know how. I know we're all coming out of a difficult period here, but good will come of this, and we will be better, stronger, and more nimble organizations, and more importantly, leaders. And I truly believe that our cultures will be stronger. So we will have this webcast presentation available for you. If you ask for it, we'll provide it for you. And we want to thank you for your time on behalf of everyone at Waterstone. Have a restful and peaceful weekend, and more importantly, one of good health. And we'll look forward to helping build high performance cultures together. Thank you.